Nobody told you it was going to disappear. You were just living it. And then one day it was gone and the world moved on and everything ordinary became extraordinary simply by ceasing to exist. This is 100 of those things, the ones so completely gone that a younger person cannot comprehend they ever existed. But you were there. Number 1. The penny candy counter. Every drugstore and 5 and dime had one. A long glass case near the register. Individual candies priced at 1 penny each, sometimes 2 for a penny. You pressed your face against the glass and took your time, and the man behind the counter waited, because that was his job and this was serious business. Mary Jane's, root beer barrels, candy buttons on paper strips. You counted out your nickel and made the most careful decisions available to a child. The glass candy case was not the only thing worth pressing your face against in the 1950s drugstore. Number 2. Wax bottles filled with juice. Nick L. Nips. Small wax bottles shaped like miniature soda bottles, each filled with a few drops of sweet-colored syrup. Cherry, orange, lemon, lime. You bit off the top, drank the tiny amount of liquid, and chewed the wax bottle until your jaw gave out. The name came from the nickel price and the biting method of opening them. The experience lasted 90 seconds and was considered worth every penny. Speaking of nickels, there was one specific coin that unlocked an entire afternoon. Number 3. The 5-cent Coke. The Coca-Cola from the fountain cost 5 cents from 1886 through most of the 1950s. 7 decades at the same price. The soda jerk drew it from a tap, mixing syrup and carbonated water in a glass, not a paper cup. The ratio of syrup to carbonation was a skill. Some soda jerks were better than others. The glass was cold. It cost a nickel. Coca-Cola began raising prices in the late 1950s. 74 years of the same price ended in a decade. The soda jerk behind the counter was just one of the familiar figures every child knew by name. Number 4. The milkman. Every morning before your family woke up, a man in a white uniform left glass bottles on your step. The bottles had a thick layer of cream at the top. You shook the bottle before pouring to mix it back in. Your mother left notes in empty bottles to change the order. The milkman read the notes and responded with the bottles. Home milk delivery declined through the 1960s and was largely gone by the early 1980s. The cold glass bottle on the step went with it. Milk was not the only thing delivered to your door in the 1950s. Number 5. The bread man. A van drove through the neighborhood several times a week. The driver carried fresh bread, rolls, cakes, and crumpets to your door. He knew what your family usually ordered. He gave the children a free cookie sometimes. The smell of fresh bread coming off the van on a Tuesday morning was its own complete experience. Supermarkets made the bread van obsolete. They did it slowly, over years, and nobody organized any resistance. Food came to your door. Entertainment came from a box in the corner of the living room. Number 6. Howdy Doody. NBC premiered Howdy Doody on December 27, 1947. By 1950, it was the dominant children's television program in America. Howdy Doody was a freckled marionette with 48 freckles on his face, one for each state before Alaska and Hawaii. Buffalo Bob Smith hosted. Clarabelle the Clown never spoke, communicating only with a bicycle horn. The waiting list for Peanut Gallery tickets reached 3 years by the early 1950s. The show ran 2,343 episodes. The final episode aired September 24, 1960. Nobody in that studio was dry-eyed. Howdy Doody had a competitor for the attention of every American child, and his name was the King of the Cowboys. Number 7. Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. The Roy Rogers Show ran from 1951 to 1957. Every episode ended with Roy and Dale singing Happy Trails together. Trigger was Roy's horse. Bullet was the German Shepherd. Buttermilk was Dale's horse. Children knew these names as well as they knew the names of their own pets. Roy Rogers appeared on lunchboxes, wallpaper, bedroom curtains, and every item of clothing a boy could persuade his mother to buy. There has not been a Roy Rogers since Roy Rogers. There was only one, and then he was gone. The lunchbox with his face on it was carried to school every morning. Number 8. The metal lunchbox. A metal lunchbox was a declaration. The character on the lid told the other children who you were. Hopalong Cassidy appeared on the first decorated lunchbox in 1950. Roy Rogers followed. Howdy Doody, Davy Crockett, the Lone Ranger. Each one had a matching metal thermos inside that sometimes leaked if the lid was not tight enough, which it often was not. By 1954, 120 different licensed character lunchboxes were on the market. Each cost about $1.49. Each was the most important object a child carried for an entire school year. Inside the lunchbox was usually a sandwich made the night before and sometimes a surprise. Number 9. Cracker Jack prizes. Cracker Jack had been around since 1893. Every American child knew the drill. You opened the box from the bottom because that was where the prize was. You dug past the caramel corn and peanuts until your fingers found the small waxed paper packet. Then you stopped eating and opened the prize first. Small tin toys, a spinning top, a tiny compass, a magnifying lens. None cost more than a fraction of a cent to produce. All felt like buried treasure. Cracker Jack changed to paper prizes in 1991. The day the tin toy disappeared was the day something ended. The tin in your pocket was not always a Cracker Jack box. Sometimes it was something you played on the sidewalk. Not plastic, not inline. Metal plate skates that clamped onto your shoes with a key. The key hung around your neck on a string. You tightened the clamps around the sole of your shoe, stood up, and immediately found out whether your shoes were tight enough to withstand the torque of the clamp. Often they were not. The skates made a sound on concrete that has no equivalent, a high metallic clatter that announced your presence half a block before you arrived. The skate key was a possession as important as any toy. Losing it was a small emergency. Playing outside required the right shoes, but some of the best games required nothing at all. Number 11. Mumble-T Peg. Every boy in 1950s America carried a pocket knife. Mumble-T Peg was what you did with it. You flipped the knife from various positions, attempting to stick the blade into the ground. The loser had to pull a small peg out of the ground with his teeth. The game was played on school grounds and in backyards without any adult involvement or approval. It required a pocket knife, a patch of dirt, and 2 or more boys. Schools banned it gradually. By the 1960s, it was fading. The boys who played it turned into men who could not explain to their own sons why throwing a knife into the ground had felt important. Knives were not the only dangerous things children were trusted with. Number 12. Cap guns. A roll of red paper caps, each one containing a tiny charge of sulfur. You loaded the roll into the revolver, pulled the hammer back, and pulled the trigger. The hammer struck the cap and produced a sharp crack and a curl of white smoke, and the specific smell of struck sulfur that no perfume chemist has ever successfully replicated. Cap guns cost 59 cents at the 5 and dime. The rolls of caps cost a dime for 100 shots. Boys wore them in holsters on their hips and conducted gunfights in their front yards every afternoon after school. The cowboys on television carried the same guns. Every boy needed to match them. Disney premiered Davy Crockett on its television program Disneyland in December 1954. By spring 1955, it was the largest mass-market children's phenomenon the country had ever seen. Every child in America needed a coonskin cap. The stores ran out. Parents drove to 3 different stores on the same afternoon. The Ballad of Davy Crockett sold 7 million copies in 1955. Fess Parker received 3,000 letters a week from children. The craze lasted almost exactly 1 year. By 1956, the coonskin cap was at the back of the closet. But for those 12 months, an entire generation of American children was completely united around one character, one cap, and one song they all knew by heart. Davy Crockett was a television invention, but the toy that came before television was simpler and stranger. Number 14. Silly Putty. Silly Putty was invented by accident in 1943 when a General Electric engineer was trying to create synthetic rubber. The material bounced, stretched, and took impressions of surfaces. It had no practical use. It sat in a lab for 6 years. By 1955, over 32 million eggs had been sold. You pressed it against the Sunday Comics page and lifted a perfect reverse image of the cartoon onto the putty. You stretched the image slowly, and the figures stretched with it until they blurred and disappeared. One of the strangest toys ever made. One of the most successful. Silly Putty came in an egg. The next toy came in a can. Number 15. The Slinky. Richard James knocked attention spring off a shelf in 1943 and watched it walk across the floor. His wife Betty named it and priced it at $1. They demonstrated it at Gimbel's in Philadelphia at Christmas 1945 and sold all 400 units in 90 minutes. A slinky going down a staircase has a sound unlike any other object in the world. A long metallic whisper that gets faster as it gains momentum and stops suddenly at the bottom with a final soft clatter. Every American child who grew up in the 1950s can hear that sound right now without trying. Over 300 million Slinkies have been sold. None of them quite matches the one you had. The Slinky walked down. The next thing you played with walked nowhere and did everything. Number 16. Marbles. Real glass marbles. Not plastic. Glass. Cat's eyes. Aggies. Steelies. You carried them in a cloth bag. The weight of a full bag in your pocket was the weight of a collected season. The game required a ring drawn in the dirt and marbles placed inside it. You kept the marbles you knocked out. Boys traded them the way they traded baseball cards. Some marbles were too beautiful to risk losing. You kept those in a separate bag and took them out only to look at them. That was permitted. That was a reasonable thing to do. Marbles were played in the dirt. The next toy was played with in the sky. Number 17. The Kite. A wooden cross frame and a paper or fabric diamond, balanced with a tail made of strips of rags tied together. You ran into the wind holding the string, and the kite climbed if the conditions were right and crashed if they were not. A kite that flew well, that climbed straight up and held steady, was the best possible Tuesday afternoon. A kite that crashed into a tree was a problem you had to solve with patience and a long stick. Most kites eventually ended up in trees. Most boys climbed up to get them. Some games required just your hands and a patch of sidewalk. 10 small 6-pointed metal pieces and a small rubber ball. You bounced the ball, scooped up jacks before the ball bounced again, then bounced it again and picked up more. Onesies, twosies, threesies, all the way to tensies. The metal jacks were cold and sharp-edged, and if you knelt on one in bare feet, the pain was immediate and specific. Girls were considered better at jacks than boys. This was largely accurate and was acknowledged without embarrassment on either side. The game required concrete or linoleum and could be played alone or with anyone who sat down across from you. From small metal pieces to small wooden pieces connected by gravity. Number 19. Lincoln Logs. John Lloyd Wright, son of the architect Frank Lloyd Wright, invented Lincoln Logs in 1916. By the 1950s, they were in nearly every American toy chest. Notched wooden pieces that stacked and interlocked to build miniature cabins, forts, and stockades. The set came in a round cardboard canister with a frontier scene on the lid. The buildings held together because the notches actually interlocked. There was something satisfying about that, about a thing that worked because of its own design, something the decade understood well. Lincoln Logs were wooden. The next construction toy was all steel. Number 20. The Erector Set. The A.C. Gilbert Company of New Haven, Connecticut introduced the Erector Set in 1913. By the 1950s, it was the definitive construction toy for American boys. Metal beams with holes for bolts, nuts and bolts in small compartments, wheels, axles, pulleys, and electric motors in the larger sets. The instruction booklet showed finished projects requiring more parts than your set contained. This was marketing. It worked. The A.C. Gilbert Company went out of business in 1967. The original sets, with their machined steel parts and heavy red carrying cases, are objects from a world that no longer manufactures them. The Erector Set built things from metal. The next toy built things from imagination alone. Number 21. The Viewmaster. You held it up to your eyes, inserted a cardboard reel, and clicked the lever. 7 pairs of circular photographs, 3-dimensional, the Grand Canyon, the Statue of Liberty, Howdy Doody, Mickey Mouse. Fairy tales photographed in miniature scenes that looked impossibly real in 3 dimensions. Children who had never left their home county could see Niagara Falls in 3D on a Tuesday afternoon. The specific quality of depth in a Viewmaster has never been fully replicated. You either remember it or you do not. 3-dimensional images in a handheld viewer were the future of entertainment in 1955. The past of entertainment was a longer drive away. Number 22. The drive-in movie. At its peak in 1958, there were 4,063 drive-in movie theaters in the United States. You drove to a field. A speaker post stood at your window. You rolled the window up enough to hold the speaker against the glass. Children wore pajamas because the movie started at dusk and would end past bedtime. You lay in the back seat and watched a movie the size of a building. By the end of the 1970s, the drive-in was mostly gone. The land was worth more as a shopping mall. The screen came down. What replaced it was indoors and climate-controlled and had nothing to do with lying in your pajamas. The drive-in was outdoors. The next great entertainment was also outdoors, and it came every afternoon. Number 23. The ice cream truck. A white truck drove slowly through the neighborhood, playing a repeating melody from a speaker on the roof. Every child within 3 blocks heard it simultaneously. Every child had the same reaction. Not quite a word, more of a sound. You ran inside. You asked. The answer was sometimes yes and sometimes not today. And the difference between those two answers was the difference between a good afternoon and a mediocre one. Good Humor employed over 3,000 drivers in the 1950s. The trucks were white. The drivers wore white uniforms with white caps. The whole presentation was an argument that ice cream was wholesome and clean and entirely appropriate for a Tuesday afternoon. The ice cream truck came to you. You walked to the next thing. Number 24. The corner drugstore soda fountain, chrome stools, a long marble counter. The soda jerk behind it knew what you usually ordered before you sat down. Cherry Coke, chocolate malted, vanilla egg cream, root beer float. Each drink was made by hand. The syrup and the carbonation measured and combined by someone who had made hundreds of them and knew how they were supposed to taste. The soda fountain was where you went after school and on Saturdays and after the movies. It was not a restaurant. It was not a store. It was the third place, the one that was neither home nor school, that existed for no purpose except to be there when you needed it. Fast food replaced it. Nothing replaced it. The soda fountain was social. The next item was solitary in the best possible way. Number 25. The Saturday morning cartoon block. From approximately 7 in the morning until noon, American television on Saturday belonged entirely to children. No adult programming. Mighty Mouse, Bugs Bunny, Tom and Jerry, The Lone Ranger, Sky King. You were in front of the set before your parents were out of bed. You ate cereal straight from the box. The rule in the 1950s household was that Saturday morning television was not interrupted by chores or haircuts. It was a negotiated peace between the children who needed those 5 hours and the parents who needed to sleep. The peace held until noon when the cartoons ended and the programs for adults began and the morning was over. Saturday morning was sacred. The next item arrived every afternoon. Number 26. The paper route. A canvas bag over your shoulder, a bicycle, a stack of papers folded into thirds and thrown with a flick of the wrist from the moving bike. Every house on the route was a target. You knew which driveways were easy and which required you to slow down. You collected payment on Friday afternoons, knocking on doors, keeping track in a small book. You saved the money in a jar. The paper route was the first job most American boys had, and the first lesson in what it meant to be relied upon. Rain or shine. Before school, before most adults were awake. The paper route is mostly gone now. The newsboy is a figure from another century. The paper route took you out of the neighborhood. The next thing brought the neighborhood to you. Number 27. Green stamps, S&H green stamps. You received them at the grocery store, 1 stamp for every 10 cents spent. You licked them and pressed them into booklets, each holding 1,200 stamps. A toaster required about 2.5 books. A bicycle required 36. You saved for months towards something specific. Booklets accumulating in a kitchen drawer, building toward an object that would arrive not because of money, but because of patience and enough small green squares. By the early 1960s, S&H green stamps were the largest single purchaser of consumer goods in the United States. More green stamps were printed each year than U.S. postage stamps. Stamps went in a book. The next thing went on the living room floor. Number 28. Board games played as a family. Not screen games, not video games. Board games that required everyone to sit at the same table and make decisions, and accept outcomes and interact directly with each other for 45 minutes to 2 hours. Candyland, Chutes and Ladders, Parcheesi, Clue, Monopoly, which lasted longer than planned and always ended with someone unhappy. The board was set up on the floor or the kitchen table. The pieces were small and easy to lose. The dog piece from Monopoly was the most desirable and was fought over at the start of every game. This game, in which a family sat together with no agenda except the game, was ordinary in the 1950s. It is not ordinary now. Board games required everyone inside. The next game only worked outside. Number 29. Kick the Can. One empty tin can. One child designated as it who guards the can while others hide. If you reached the can and kicked it before it caught you, all captured players were freed. The game required no equipment except a can and an open street. It could be played by any number of children and required negotiated rules and collective decision-making and the management of fairness in real time without any adult present. Children who grew up playing Kick the Can learned something. Researchers who study childhood development have been trying to say exactly what for decades. The game is mostly gone from American streets. The lesson went with it. Some games took all evening. The next thing marked when evening ended. Number 30. The streetlight curfew. No parent in the 1950s needed to text their child to come home. The streetlights came on at dusk, and every child in every neighborhood in America understood what that meant. Not a suggestion, not a gentle reminder, a signal. When the lights came on, you came home. The system required no technology and no enforcement beyond the shared understanding of every child on every street that the light was the rule. Developmental psychologist Roger Hart, studying a Vermont community in the mid-1970s, found that children regularly traveled a mile or more from home on their own. When he returned 40 years later, children barely left the front yard. The streetlight curfew was the outer boundary of a world that no longer exists. The end of the day was marked by light. The beginning of the school day was marked by a sound. Number 31. The school bell. A physical bell, in many schools a handbell rung by a teacher. In others, an electric bell on the wall that produced a metallic clang with no musicality whatsoever. The bell had absolute authority. Whatever you were doing stopped. Whatever class was happening ended. You moved from your chair, whether you were finished or not, because the bell had rung and the bell was the law. The bell for recess and the bell at the end of the day had different qualities of meaning. The same sound, the same clang. But the one that meant recess was the most beautiful sound in the English language. The bell marked time. What you did with recess time was entirely yours. Number 32. Hopscotch. Chalk on sidewalk. A stone. A pattern of numbered squares. You threw the stone, hopped through the grid on one foot, retrieved the stone on the way back. Simple enough to learn in 30 seconds. Good enough to play for an hour. Every sidewalk in America in the 1950s had a hopscotch grid on it somewhere. Children drew them and other children played them, and rain washed them away and children drew them again. The game existed in a continuous state of being drawn and played and erased and redrawn, season after season, year after year, in every town. Hopscotch needed chalk. The next game needed nothing. Number 33. Red Rover. Two lines of children facing each other across a field. Each child holding hands with the children on either side. One line called out, Red Rover, send somebody over. The named child ran toward the opposing line and tried to break through the joined hands. If they broke through, they took someone back. If they did not, they joined the opposing line. The game was physical contact, mutual grip, collective strength against individual speed. Schools banned it gradually throughout the 1970s and 1980s. The reason given was safety. What was lost was harder to articulate. Some games were loud. The next thing happened in near silence. Number 34. The card catalog at the library. A large wooden cabinet with rows of small flat drawers, each filled with index cards, author cards, title cards, subject cards, each typed individually on a typewriter. You pulled open a drawer and the cards inside were worn soft at the edges from years of children's hands. The smell of the cards themselves was slightly dusty, slightly sweet, the smell of all the books they represented. Finding a book required navigating the catalog. knowing how libraries organize things, asking the librarian for help when confused. Libraries began replacing card catalogs with computer terminals in the 1980s. The last major catalog was retired in the early 1990s. Hundreds of thousands of hand-typed index cards went into storage boxes and were eventually discarded. The library had its own smell. So did the next place every child went once a week. Number 35. The barbershop. Not a hair salon, a barbershop. A striped pole outside that turned slowly. 2 or 3 chairs with hydraulic foot pumps that raised and lowered the seat. A row of waiting chairs where men sat reading magazines and waiting their turn. The barber knew your father and asked after him while cutting your hair. He used a straight razor on the back of your neck at the end of the cut. The final step was a dusting of talcum powder from a soft brush. The shop smelled like hair tonic and shaving cream and the particular warm smell of a place where men gathered. The barber shop still exists, but the one you remember, the one with the men waiting and the striped pole turning and the barber who knew your father, that one is mostly gone. The barber shop was a place for men. The next place was for everyone. Number 36. The Five and Dime. Woolworths, Kresge's, McCrory's. Every American town had at least one. A long store with merchandise on low counters and no doors on the displays. Everything reachable, everything touchable. A lunch counter along one wall where you could get a grilled cheese and a glass of milk. The prices were printed on small paper tags, and almost nothing cost more than $1. The Five and Dime was not a grocery store, and not a hardware store, and not a toy store. It was all of those things at once, in smaller quantities, at lower prices, in a building that felt like it belonged to everyone. Woolworths operated over 1,000 American stores in 1960. The last Woolworths closed in 1997. The Five and Dime sold everything small. The next store sold everything large once a year. Number 37. The Sears Wish Book. Every fall, the Christmas catalog arrived in the mailbox. Hundreds of pages of toys organized by age, photographed in color, described in language that made a model airplane sound like the most important object in the world. Children carried it the way adults carried important documents. Dog-eared, annotated, certain pages bent back for reference. You circled what you wanted and left the catalog open to those pages where your mother could not fail to see it. The Sears Wish Book was discontinued in 1993. For millions of American children, it had been the first catalog of their dreams, the first experience of organized longing, the first understanding that some things required waiting for. The Sears Wish Book arrived in October. The next thing arrived at Christmas morning. Number 38. The Toy Train Under the Christmas Tree. Not a toy, a complete system. Track laid in an oval around the base of the tree. A locomotive that ran on electricity from a transformer plugged into the wall. Freight cars, a cattle car with tiny plastic cows, a flat car carrying miniature lumber. The locomotive produced a whistle sound from a piston driven by steam, or in some models by a small puff of smoke from a smokeless fuel pellet placed in the smokestack. Lionel and American Flyer were the dominant brands. Your father assembled it on Christmas Eve after you were in bed, and he was the one who enjoyed it most, and everyone understood this, and nobody said anything about it. The train ran in a circle under the tree. The next toy could be folded completely flat. Number 39. Paper dolls. A cardboard doll printed on stiff paper with a wardrobe of paper outfits, each one with small paper tabs that folded over the doll's shoulders and hips to hold the clothing in place. You cut them out with scissors, which required patience, and the tabs were always slightly too small or too large, and the outfits never quite stayed on the way the picture on the box suggested. Paper doll books cost 10 cents. Girls spent entire rainy afternoons with them. The paper dolls of the 1950s were printed in magazines too. A full page of outfits for the paper doll printed 2 pages before. You cut carefully and kept the dolls in an envelope. Paper dolls were flat. The next doll was anything but. Number 40. The composition doll. Before Barbie, before plastic, the standard doll was made of composition, a mixture of sawdust and glue formed under pressure and painted. The hair was real human hair or mohair, rooted into the scalp in small plugs. The eyes were glass, weighted so they closed when the doll was laid down. The body was cloth. The composition shell was painted and lacquered and could crack if dropped or left in cold temperatures. creating a network of fine lines across the face that looked like old porcelain. These cracks were considered damage. They are now considered beautiful. The composition doll gave way to hard plastic in the early 1950s, and then to soft plastic by the end of the decade. The dolls with the cracked faces are in antique stores now, staring out of glass cases with their weighted glass eyes. Dolls were for girls. The next item was theoretically for everyone and was used by everyone. Number 41. The Backyard Sandbox. A wooden frame, roughly 4 feet square, filled with sand. Not beach sand. Builder's sand, coarser, heavier. Your father built the frame from scrap lumber and filled it from bags bought at the hardware store. You spent entire mornings in it, building roads for toy cars, constructing cities with walls and buildings made of packed sand, burying things and digging them up. The sandbox required nothing from you except your presence and your hands, and your willingness to be in one place for an extended period doing a thing that produced nothing permanent. Every parent understood instinctively that this was the best kind of play. Some things that were understood instinctively have been forgotten. The sandbox was in the backyard. The next game was in the street. Number 42. Stickball. A rubber ball, a broomstick with the broom head removed, and a city block. You pitched the rubber ball off the ground, so it bounced up to the batter. The batter swung the broomstick. Whatever they hit determined the bases. The sewer covers were the bases. A ball hit past the third sewer cover was a home run. Every city neighborhood in 1950s, America had a stickball game on its block on Saturday afternoons. The game required no diamond, no bases, no gloves, no batting helmets, no coaches, no umpires, no parents. Just the ball and the stick and the agreed-upon rules and the afternoon. Stickball was a city game. The next game required more space. Number 43. Tag. One child is it. It chases the others. If it touches you, you become it. There are no other rules. The game requires only children, an open space, and the willingness to run. Tag was so simple that children played it before they had enough language to explain it. Variations existed. Freeze tag, where you could be unfrozen by another player touching you. TV tag, where you named a television show and squatted down to be safe. The variations multiplied across every schoolyard and every neighborhood until there were dozens of versions, each one locally invented and locally understood. Tag is still played, but the street is quieter now and the afternoons are scheduled and the children are fewer. Tag needed space. The next thing needed concentration. Number 44. Pickup sticks. A bundle of thin sticks, each painted in bright colors, dropped in a heap on a flat surface. You extracted sticks one at a time without disturbing the others. The colors determined the point value. Moving another stick meant your turn ended. The game rewarded patience and steady hands, and the ability to see the structure underneath the apparent chaos, and find the one stick that could be removed without changing anything else. This was considered a children's game. It requires skills that take a lifetime to develop and that most adults do not possess. The pickup stick set cost about 50 cents at the 5 and dime. Pickup sticks required stillness. The next toy moved on its own. Number 45. Tin wind-up toys. Before batteries, before electricity, the key inserted into the side of the toy turned several times to win the spring mechanism inside. When you set the toy down, it moved. A tin hen pecked at the floor. A tin soldier marched in a circle. A tin monkey climbed a string. The motion continued for 20 or 30 seconds, and then the spring ran down and the toy stopped. You wound it again. The tin wind-up toy was a small miracle of simple engineering, a thing that moved because someone had wound a spring inside it. Made in occupied Japan in the early 1950s, stamped with those words on the bottom. The toys are collectibles now. The children who played with them are in their 70s and 80s. Wind-up toys ran down. The next thing kept going as long as you kept pumping. Number 46. The bicycle pump. A long cylindrical pump with a flexible rubber hose that attached to the valve on your bicycle tire. You pumped it standing up, both hands on the handle, pushing down, the pressure building in the tire. The tire that was soft enough to show a flat bulge on the bottom was a tire that needed pumping. You pumped it yourself. You learned by doing it wrong first. You attached the hose incorrectly and the air came out instead of going in. You learned to press the fitting firmly before pumping. You learned that the pump required more strokes than you expected. The bicycle pump was the first piece of maintenance equipment most American children ever owned and operated. It was not considered an unusual responsibility for an 8-year-old. Maintenance was expected of children. The next item required a different kind of work. Number 47. The lemonade stand. A card table at the end of the driveway. A handwritten sign in crayon on cardboard. A pitcher of lemonade, usually made from powder or from a can of frozen concentrate reconstituted with water. The price was typically 5 cents a glass. On a good day, you might sell 10 glasses and make 50 cents. You paid for the lemonade yourself, or your mother paid for it, and you called it a contribution. The lemonade stand was the first business most American children operated. It taught the concept of cost versus revenue in a single afternoon, without any instruction manual. Business on the sidewalk. The next item took your nickels at the boardwalk. Number 48. Skee ball. A long wooden lane, slightly inclined, with a ramp at the far end that curved upward toward a series of concentric rings. You rolled a small wooden ball down the lane, and it launched off the ramp and landed in one of the rings. The center ring scored the most. The outer ring scored the least. Skee ball lanes were at every boardwalk, every amusement park, and every arcade in 1950s America. The game dispensed tickets based on your score, and the tickets were exchanged for prizes at a counter. A small plastic toy required 25 tickets. A stuffed animal required 500. The gap between what an afternoon of skee ball produced and what the best prize required was intentional and was understood by children and accepted as the cost of the experience. The game is still found at arcades. The wooden balls and the wooden lanes of the 1950s have been replaced by fiberglass and electronics. The gap between the tickets you earned and the prize you wanted remains exactly the same. Skee ball was at the boardwalk. The next memory was on every street. Number 49. Flying a kite. A wooden cross frame and a paper diamond, balanced with a rag tail. You ran into the wind holding the string, and the kite climbed if the conditions were right. A kite that flew well, that climbed straight and held steady, was a complete afternoon. A kite that crashed into a tree was a problem. Most kites eventually ended up in trees. Most boys climbed up to get them. Kite string was sold on small wooden spools, and you could extend the kite's range by tying 2 spools together. Kites are still available. The afternoon required to fly one is less available. The kite went up. The next thing spun around. Number 50. The top. A wooden or metal spinning top, pointed at the bottom, launched by winding a string around the upper body and throwing it down while pulling the string back. The top landed spinning and continued to spin, wobbling slightly, moving in small circles. A well-thrown top spun for over a minute. The skill was in the throwing, the angle of release, the speed of the string pull. Boys carried tops in their pockets and held competitions. The top that spun longest won. The top is one of the oldest toys in human history. The version in a 1950s boy's pocket was descended directly from tops found in ancient archaeological sites. That continuity ended somewhere around 1975. The top spun until it fell. The next thing asked you to find what was hidden. Number 51. Hide and seek. One child counts to 20 against a tree. Everyone else hides. It finds them. The last one found wins. When you are 9 years old, hiding behind a hedge in the gathering dusk, while someone counts to 20, your heart rate does something specific. Not fear exactly. A heightened state that has no precise adult equivalent. The moment of being found, of being seen while believing you were invisible, was its own small revelation about the limits of concealment. Hide and seek required darkness and space and the willingness of adults to let children be outside after the light had gone. It required the neighborhood to be a safe enough place that nobody worried. It required a world that the 1950s still had. Hide and seek ended when someone was found. The next thing ended when it hit the ground. Number 52. Blowing soap bubbles. A small jar of soapy liquid and a wire wand with a loop at one end. You dipped the wand, held it to your lips, and blew slowly. A bubble formed and detached and floated. The bubble lasted between 3 seconds and 15 seconds, depending on the humidity in the wind and whether anyone waved their hand near it. The soap bubble was completely without purpose and completely satisfying. It was one of the cleanest examples of something that existed only to be beautiful for a brief moment and then stop. Children understood this intuitively. They blew bubbles by the hour. Bubbles floated away. The next thing you had to run to catch. Number 53. Lightning bugs in a jar. On summer evenings, you caught fireflies in a glass jar with a metal lid punched with small holes. You carried the jar and watched it glow. The green light was cold, not hot, bioluminescent, produced by a chemical reaction in the insect's abdomen. In 1955, no child knew the word bioluminescent. What they knew was that you could catch the light itself, hold it in a jar, watch it pulse. Most parents insisted the bugs be released before bed. Most children complied. The jar sat on the nightstand for a few minutes, glowing in the dark, and then the lid was opened on the back porch and the lights drifted away. Some lights you released, some you turned on deliberately. Number 54. Flashlight tag. A variation on regular tag played in complete darkness. One child holds the flashlight. You are tagged when the beam touches you. The flashlight became a weapon, a detector, a hunting tool. The darkness of a 1950s residential street at 9 in the evening was genuine darkness. There were no phone screens. The street lights were sodium vapor, dim and widely spaced. Between them was actual dark. Children ran through it by memory and sound, and the distant beam of one flashlight swinging. This game required parents to accept that their children were outside in the dark. Most parents accepted this. The parents who grew up in that dark had survived it. Dark games ended when parents called. Indoor games could go all evening. Number 55. Tinker Toys. Circular wooden spools and wooden sticks in various lengths. The sticks inserted into holes in the rim of the spool. No instructions required. No correct way to build. You built what occurred to you and took it apart and built something else. The Tinker Toy set came in a round cardboard canister exactly like the Lincoln Log canister, and boys who had both sets kept them meticulously separate. The Tinker Toy was invented in 1914 by a stonemason named Charles Pajot, who watched children playing with pencils and spools of thread. He recognized what children could do with simple connecting pieces and built an industry around the observation. Tinker Toys are still manufactured. The observation that started them has not gone out of date. Round building pieces. Square playing pieces. Number 56. Checkers. A board of 64 squares in alternating red and black. 12 pieces per player. You move diagonally. You captured by jumping. If your piece reached the far side of the board, it was king by stacking a second piece on top, which allowed it to move in either direction. The king was a position of advantage that every child understood intuitively as the goal. Checkers was the first strategy game most American children learned. It was played at kitchen tables and on porch steps and in barber shops where a board sat on a small table in the corner for waiting customers. A good checkers player could beat an adult. This was one of the few areas in 1950s life where a child could regularly beat an adult, and the adult was expected to accept it. Checkers was one board game. The next board game lasted considerably longer. Number 57. Monopoly. Parker Brothers introduced Monopoly in 1935, and by the 1950s it was in virtually every American household. The game required a full afternoon and usually went longer. Someone was the banker. Someone bought all the railroads. Someone got sent to jail 3 turns in a row. Someone turned over the board eventually, or threatened to. The dog piece was the most desirable token and was fought over at the start of every game. The game taught real estate economics, negotiation, and the specific pain of watching someone else prosper. Most games of Monopoly ended not with a winner, but with a mutual agreement that it had gone on long enough. Monopoly had no real ending. The next toy had a built-in one. Number 58. The yo-yo. A spool of 2 discs connected by an axle, attached to a string. You wound the string, held the end of the string around your middle finger, dropped the spool, and it descended, spinning, then climbed back up on the twist of the string. This was the basic move. Advanced moves had names. Walk the dog, around the world, rock the baby. The yo-yo competitions held at 5 and dimes across America in the 1950s drew crowds. The Duncan Company employed a team of yo-yo demonstrators who traveled the country conducting contests. A good yo-yo player was a minor celebrity in any schoolyard. The yo-yo required daily practice to maintain skill. The skill deteriorated almost immediately when practice stopped. This also was considered a lesson. The yo-yo came back up, the next thing balanced on a string. Number 59. The gyroscope. A spinning wheel mounted in a frame. When you spun it with a string pull and placed it on a surface, it resisted falling. You could balance it on your fingertip, on a tightrope, on the edge of a pencil. The gyroscope demonstrated the principle of angular momentum without any explanation being necessary. You felt the force yourself, the frame pulling against your hand when you tried to tilt it, the wheel asserting its direction. The gyroscope was sold as a toy. It was also sold as a demonstration of physics. For children, it was simply the thing that would not fall down when it should have. The gyroscope resisted gravity. The next toy worked entirely with gravity. Number 60. The Duncan Yo-Yo Competition. Duncan employed professional yo-yo demonstrators who traveled to every five and dime in America, demonstrating tricks, selling yo-yos, and holding contests with the children who gathered. The demonstrators were usually young men who had developed extraordinary skill. They could perform 30 or 40 moves in sequence without the yo-yo touching the ground. Children watched open-mouthed. The contests had small prizes, usually a better yo-yo or a Duncan patch. The ritual of the yo-yo man arriving at the five and dime was one of the standard events of 1950s small-town American childhood. Duncan still makes yo-yos. The demonstrator in the striped shirt does not come to the store anymore. The yo-yo demonstrator came to town. The next figure came to your door. Number 61. The Fuller Brush Man. A man in a suit carrying a sample case knocked on your front door on a weekday morning. He was the Fuller Brush Man. He had been coming to this street for years. Your mother knew him by name. He sold brushes, cleaning supplies, and personal care products door to door. He offered a free sample brush at the door, which was how he got in. Once inside, he opened the sample case and demonstrated the products. The Fuller Brush Company had over 100,000 door-to-door salesmen at its peak in the 1950s. They sold to housewives who were home during the day, in an era when housewives were home during the day. The Fuller Brush Man disappeared as working women became the norm, and empty houses became the standard. The Fuller Brush Man came to sell. The next man came to give. Number 62. The Good Humor Man. The ice cream man in the white uniform who drove the white truck. Good Humor was founded in 1920 and by the 1950s employed over 3,000 drivers in the northeastern United States. The product was an ice cream bar on a stick, chocolate-coated, called a Good Humor bar. It cost 10 cents. The drivers wore white uniforms with white caps and white shoes and white belts. The whole presentation was deliberate and specific. Ice cream was wholesome, clean, and entirely appropriate. When the truck turned your corner on a summer afternoon, the bells it rang were not random. They were tuned to attract children, and they worked precisely as intended. The Good Humor Man rang bells. The next thing in this list made no sound at all. Number 63. The Bazooka Joe Comic. Bazooka bubblegum was introduced in 1947. In 1953, the Topps Company added a small waxed paper comic strip to the wrapper. Bazooka Joe wore an eye patch for no explained reason. His friend Mort wore his turtleneck pulled up over his mouth, also unexplained. The jokes were not particularly funny. Children read them anyway because they came with the gum, and the gum was the point, and the comic was free. You unfolded it carefully because the waxed paper tore easily, and an unreadable comic was unsatisfying even if the joke would not have been funny. The gum was hard at first. You worked it for 10 minutes until it was soft enough to blow a bubble. The bubble popped and stuck to your face. That also was the point. The bubble gum wrapper had a picture. The next wrapper had a prize. Number 64. Candy cigarettes. A white chalky stick with a red painted tip designed to look exactly like a lit cigarette. In the early 1950s, they were called Popeye cigarettes. Children tucked them in their shirt pockets and pretended to smoke them. Adults thought nothing of it because adults smoked everywhere in 1953. In offices, in hospitals, in cars with the windows up and the children in the back seat. A child pretending to smoke was a child pretending to be an adult. That was considered charming. The candy itself was chalky and sweet and slightly powdery. The performance of smoking it was the entire product. Candy cigarettes were pretend smoking. The next candy was pretend drinking. Number 65. Root beer barrels. Hard golden candies shaped like small wooden barrels, flavored with artificial root beer. The flavor was concentrated and sweet, and bore some relationship to actual root beer without being exactly like it. The root beer barrel was a penny candy staple. You could buy 5 for a nickel. They lasted a long time if you did not bite them, which you always eventually did. The crunch of a root beer barrel was satisfying in a way that the slow suck was not. You always told yourself you would make it last, and you never did. Root beer barrels were a penny. The next candy was also a penny and was its own complete experience. Number 66. Necco wafers. The New England Confectionery Company had been making Necco wafers since 1847. A roll of thin chalky discs in 8 flavors: lemon, lime, orange, clove, cinnamon, wintergreen, licorice, chocolate. The roll cost a nickel. The taste was mild and slightly powdery, and vaguely medicinal in a way that was entirely its own. Union soldiers had carried them during the Civil War. Arctic explorers had taken them on expeditions because they lasted indefinitely. By the time you bought them at the drugstore in 1954, they were already 100 years old. The New England Confectionery Company went bankrupt in 2018. Another company purchased the brand, but the company that made them for 171 years is gone. Some candy required patience. The next candy rewarded it. Number 67. The Jawbreaker. A sphere of compressed sugar in layers of different colors. Each layer a different flavor. Each layer revealed as the previous one dissolved. The Jawbreaker was the candy that most honestly represented the relationship between patience and reward. You could not hurry it. Biting it was strongly discouraged by both the candy's resistance and by your own teeth's self-preservation instinct. You sucked it and the color changed, and the flavor changed, and the sphere grew smaller by imperceptible degrees over an hour or more. A large Jawbreaker, bought for a penny from the jar at the candy counter, could last an entire school day if managed correctly. The Jawbreaker lasted forever. The next item was gone in one click. Number 68. The Pez dispenser. A plastic candy stick with a character head on top. You press the head back and a single candy brick emerged from the neck. Santa Claus was one of the first character heads in 1952. Mickey Mouse followed, then dozens of others. The candy itself was chalky and vaguely fruit-flavored. It was not the point. The tilting head was the point. The mechanism was the point. The specific action of pressing the character's head back and catching the candy brick on your tongue was a ritual that belonged entirely to childhood and had no adult equivalent. Pez dispensers are still sold. The ones from the 1950s are now collector's items worth considerably more than the penny candy they dispensed. The Pez dispenser was small. The next thing was enormous. Number 69. The console television. Not a flat screen, not a panel mounted on a wall. A piece of furniture. A wooden cabinet 3 feet tall and 2 feet wide, with a small curved screen set into the center. The cabinet was made to match the other furniture in the living room. The screen was approximately 12 inches diagonal and showed images in black and white. The television took 30 to 45 seconds to warm up after you turned it on, the picture resolving slowly from a bright dot in the center to a full image. If you turned it off and turned it back on too quickly, the screen glowed slightly from residual heat. The console television was not a device. It was a member of the household. It occupied a specific corner of the living room that had been cleared for it. Its presence reorganized the furniture. The television sat in the corner. The next thing sat in a cradle on the wall. Number 70. The Party Line Telephone. A single telephone circuit shared by multiple households in the same neighborhood. Each house had a distinctive ring pattern. 2 long rings for the Millers, 3 short rings for the Petersons. You knew from the ring whether the call was for you. You also knew when the neighbor was on the line because you could pick up your receiver and hear them talking. Most people pretended not to do this. Most people did it. The telephone operator, a real person employed by the telephone company, could be reached by dialing 0 and would connect long-distance calls and answer local information requests. She was also, in small towns, a source of community information that no directory provided. The party line was replaced by private lines through the 1950s and 1960s. The operator survived into the 1980s in reduced form before being replaced by recorded systems. The telephone was shared. The next thing was personal. Number 71. The pocket knife. Every American boy in the 1950s carried one. A small folding knife with one or two blades carried in the front pocket of your trousers. The knife had practical uses: sharpening pencils, cutting string, whittling sticks to points for various purposes that made immediate sense to a boy and would now require explanation. Schools permitted them. Adults gave them as gifts. Receiving your first pocket knife was a rite of passage with a specific date attached to it. A birthday, or a Christmas, or a first day of summer that you could recall precisely decades later. The possession of a pocket knife was considered appropriate for a child and a signal of trust from the adult who gave it. That trust, in that form, is no longer routinely extended. The pocket knife was trusted. The next item was strictly controlled. Number 72. School milk. A small glass bottle of whole milk, a third of a pint, delivered to every classroom in America every morning. The milk sat in a wire rack near the door. In winter, it was cold. In warm weather, depending on when the delivery came and how long the bottles sat, it was room temperature, which gave it a quality that school children did not prefer. You drank it with a paper straw that dissolved slightly in the liquid, giving the last third of the milk a faint paperiness. The school milk program had been established during the Depression to address nutritional deficiencies in poor children. By the 1950s, it was universal. You drank it whether you wanted it or not. Milk came in a bottle. The next thing came in a pan. Number 73. The TV dinner. Swanson introduced the first commercially sold frozen dinner in 1953. Turkey, stuffing, sweet potatoes, and peas in compartmentalized aluminum tray. You put the tray in the oven at 425 degrees for 25 minutes. The kitchen smelled like aluminum and steam. You ate from the tray on a folding table in front of the television, which was the explicit design intention of the product. The name said everything. The TV dinner was the first food specifically designed to be eaten while watching television. Swanson sold 10 million of them in the first year. The aluminum tray has been replaced by plastic. The concept has become the standard of American eating. The TV dinner was eaten in front of the television. The next thing was listened to beside the radio. Number 74. The radio program. Before television dominated, radio dominated. The family gathered around the wooden cabinet radio in the living room, the way they would later gather around the television set. Jack Benny, Fibber McGee and Molly, The Lone Ranger, The Shadow, Inner Sanctum. Programs that produced images entirely in the listener's mind, from sound effects and voices and music. The creak of the inner sanctum door at the beginning of each episode was famous enough to be recognizable from a single description. Radio drama required imagination in a way that television did not. The radio programs moved to television through the 1950s, one by one, taking their characters with them. The radio cabinet stayed in the living room, playing music now, its narrative function replaced. Radio filled the evening. The next thing filled Saturday morning differently. Number 75. The cereal box toy. You did not buy the cereal for the cereal. You bought it for what was inside. In the 1950s, cereal manufacturers competed for children's attention by including small toys and prizes in every box. Kellogg's, Post, and General Mills all ran extensive toy inside programs. Submarine models that actually submerged when placed in water, powered by baking soda. Decoder rings with moving discs. Miniature cars. Small figurines from popular television programs. The prize was at the bottom of the box, which required either waiting until the box was nearly empty or reaching past the cereal with your arm buried to the elbow. Most children reached. Most cereal had arm-shaped channels excavated through it by the end of the week. The cereal box had a prize inside. The next item was a prize itself. Number 76. The comic book. 10 cents, 8 pages. A superhero or a cowboy or a horror story told in panels of ink drawings with speech bubbles and sound effects written in large letters. Wham, Kapow, Superman, Batman, Captain America, Archie, Little Lulu. Horror comics, which parents found disturbing enough that a congressional subcommittee investigated them in 1954, and the Comics Code Authority was established to regulate content. The comic book was sold at every drugstore and five and dime. It It was read and traded and collected and occasionally read under the covers with a flashlight after lights out. The Comics Code sanitized the horror comics but left the superheroes intact. Those superheroes are now the basis of a billion-dollar film industry. The 10-cent comic that contained them is in a protective sleeve in a collector's cabinet. The comic book was read. The next item was operated. Number 77. The chemistry set. A wooden box containing small glass vials of chemicals, a rack for test tubes, a burner, safety instructions that most children read once and did not revisit, and a booklet of experiments. The experiments produced colored solutions, small precipitates, gas bubbles, and occasionally small fires. The chemistry set was sold as an educational toy and was educational in the most direct sense. You learned that certain combinations of chemicals produced heat. You learned this by producing heat you had not anticipated. The chemistry set of the 1950s contained compounds that are no longer included in sets sold today, for reasons that anyone who used one can probably identify. The chemistry set produced controlled reactions. The next item produced uncontrolled joy. Number 78. The water pistol. A small plastic pistol with a reservoir that held approximately 2 ounces of water. You filled it from the tap. It squirted a stream approximately 4 feet under ideal conditions. The trigger mechanism was a simple plunger. The water ran out in 8 to 12 shots. You refilled it at the garden hose. A water pistol fight involving multiple children and multiple hoses, and a summer afternoon could continue for hours, with only the mutual exhaustion of the participants bringing it to a close. Water pistols cost 10 cents at the 5 and dime. The garden hose they were filled from was free. The water pistol was small. The next toy was enormous. Number 79. The wagon. A steel wagon with 4 wheels and a long wooden handle that you steered by moving the handle from side to side. Red was the standard color. The Radio Flyer Company had been making them since 1917. By the 1950s, the red wagon was as standard a piece of American childhood equipment as a bicycle. You carried things in it, rocks, dirt, younger siblings. You sat in it and had an older sibling pull you. You rode it down hills using your feet as brakes, which worked imperfectly. The Radio Flyer Company still makes the wagon, but the hills to ride down have been replaced by driveways to park in, and the hills and the speed and the imperfect braking were most of the point. The wagon was red. The next item was green, and it was everywhere. Number 80. Crabgrass. Not a toy, not a game, just crabgrass. Every American lawn in the 1950s fought crabgrass. Your father fought it, the man next door fought it, the man across the street fought it. They talked about it at backyard barbecues. They compared remedies. They pointed out patches in each other's lawns and offered suggestions. The battle against crabgrass was one of the central masculine occupations of 1950s suburban life. The lawn was the front of the house that the world saw. The lawn was the measure of your commitment to the neighborhood. The crabgrass was the enemy. This enemy was never permanently defeated, but the engagement was continuous and the engagement was shared. And in being shared, it was peculiarly one of the things that made the neighborhood a neighborhood. The lawn connected neighbors. The next thing connected families. Number 81. Sunday dinner. Every Sunday, every family. The same table, a roast or a chicken or a ham, started in the morning, filling the house with the smell of cooking meat and vegetables through the afternoon. The good dishes out of the cabinet, the tablecloth from the linen drawer. The children dressed in their Sunday clothes from church. Grace before the meal. Everyone at the table at the same time. The Sunday dinner was not optional and it was not casual. It was the weekly ceremony by which the family confirmed that it was still a family. The meal lasted an hour. The clearing up lasted another 30 minutes. The afternoon after was the quietest part of the week. Sunday dinner was formal. The next item made it festive. Number 82. The Jell-O mold. Flavored gelatin dissolved in hot water, combined with canned fruit, poured into a ring-shaped mold, and refrigerated until solid. Unmolded onto a plate, it held the shape of the mold, wobbling slightly, translucent in the light. The 1950s Jell-O mold appeared at church potlucks, at Sunday dinners, at every occasion that required bringing a dish to share. It was considered sophisticated. It was photographed in magazines as an example of modern American cooking. Lime Jell-O with cottage cheese and crushed pineapple. Orange Jell-O with shredded carrots. The Jell-O mold is not often made now. This is not entirely a loss, but it was a specific artifact of a specific time, and the specific time is gone. Food brought the family together. The next thing brought the neighborhood together. Number 83. The block party. Once a year, usually in late summer, a section of the residential street closed to traffic for an afternoon. Card tables and folding chairs in the road. Each family brought a dish. Someone brought a grill. Someone brought a record player with an extension cord running from their porch. The children played in the street without having to watch for cars. The adults talked to neighbors they waved to every day but rarely spoke to at length. The block party was the annual confirmation that the street was more than a collection of individual properties. It was a community. The confirmation required no ceremony and no speech. It required only the tables in the road and the dishes on the tables in the afternoon. The block party was outside. The next thing happened inside every home. Number 84. The Fallout Shelter Pamphlet. A small booklet printed by the Federal Civil Defense Administration delivered to every American household. It contained instructions for surviving a nuclear attack, how to build a shelter in your basement, what supplies to stock, how many days to remain inside after the blast, 2 weeks of food and water, a hand crank radio to receive the all-clear signal. The pamphlet was illustrated with cheerful diagrams of families in well-stocked shelters. Some families followed the instructions and built shelters. Most families put the pamphlet in a kitchen drawer and went on with their lives. Both responses were honest. The threat was real. The protection offered was not adequate. The decade chose to believe otherwise. The pamphlet described a precaution. The next item was a practice. Number 85. The duck and cover drill. The teacher gave the signal, or the alarm sounded, and 30 children did the same thing without hesitation. They slid from their seats, dropped to the floor, crawled under their wooden desks, tucked their knees up, and covered the backs of their necks with their clasped hands. The teacher counted. They got up. They returned to their seats. The lesson continued. The drill was conducted by the Federal Civil Defense Administration beginning in 1951, the year Bert the Turtle starred in a civil defense film shown in schools nationwide. The desk would not protect a child from a nuclear blast, and everyone involved knew it. The drill was not about protection. It was about the appearance of having done something. An entire generation of American children performed that appearance every year of their schooling. The drill was inside. The next memory is from outside, but not much farther. Number 86. Playing in the alley. Behind every row of 1950s suburban houses was an alley. Not a road, an alley. Barely wide enough for a car, paved with cracked asphalt or packed gravel, lined with the back fences and garbage cans and utility poles of the houses on either side. Children claimed the alley. It was transitional space, not quite the backyard and not quite the street, and that ambiguity made it useful. You built things in the alley. You conducted experiments in the alley. You had conversations in the alley that you would not have had anywhere a parent could see you from a window. The alley was the first unsupervised territory most children occupied. The alley was between houses. The next game used the whole street. Number 87. Riding bikes in packs. Not organized, not helmeted, not supervised. A group of children on bicycles moving through the neighborhood as a loose formation, stopping when someone stopped, turning when someone turned, communicating primarily by proximity rather than language. The pack had no leader and no destination. It moved by collective momentum. You could join it by riding into it and leave it by stopping and letting it continue without you. The pack of children on bicycles was a standard feature of every residential street in 1950s America on every afternoon with adequate weather. Researchers studying children's independent mobility have documented its disappearance. The streets that used to have them are the same streets. The bicycles still exist. The pack does not. The pack moved through the neighborhood. The next thing was found in the neighborhood by someone who knew where to look. Number 88. The garden hose. In summer, the garden hose was a water delivery system, a car washing tool, a lawn irrigation device, and a toy. You drank from it. The water tasted of rubber. You filled squirt guns from it. You set the nozzle to the finest spray and ran through it on hot afternoons, the arc of water catching the light. You watered your mother's garden with it under instruction, which was not as interesting as using it for the other things. The garden hose was the cheapest form of summer entertainment available to an American child and was available in every yard. Drinking from the hose is now discouraged. At the time, it was simply what you did when you were thirsty and outside. The garden hose was outside. The next memory is from the kitchen. Number 89. The cookie jar. A ceramic jar with a fitted lid, shaped like a barn, or a bear, or a mushroom, or a simple cylinder with a painted design, kept on the kitchen counter or on top of the refrigerator. Inside was whatever your mother had baked most recently. Oatmeal cookies, peanut butter cookies, sugar cookies with colored sugar on top. You lifted the lid quietly when you thought nobody was watching. The lid made a sound when it touched the rim that was detectable from the next room. You developed a specific technique for lifting it slowly enough to suppress the sound, and it never entirely worked. The cookie jar was the first security system most American children tested. Most American children failed to defeat it. The kitchen had its sounds. The living room had its sounds too. A phonograph with a diamond-tipped needle that read the grooves in a vinyl record. High-fidelity sound, abbreviated to hi-fi, was the marketing term for audio quality that reproduced music accurately. The hi-fi record player sat in the living room on a low cabinet. You set the needle on the record carefully. A careless approach produced a scratch that damaged the record and produced a clicking artifact on every subsequent play. The record was played at 33 revolutions per minute for long-playing albums, 45 revolutions per minute for singles. Records were stored vertically in a wooden rack. Playing someone's records without permission was a breach of household etiquette. Records were expensive. They were not replaced easily. They were treated with care that no digital music file has ever received. The hi-fi played music. The next thing played in the backyard. Number 91. Croquet. Wooden mallets, wooden balls. Wire wickets hammered into the lawn in a specific pattern. The ball was struck through the wickets in the correct sequence. If your ball struck an opponent's ball, you could place your ball against theirs and use your foot to hold your ball while striking it, sending the opponent's ball far off course. This was called croqueting your opponent and was considered acceptable and mildly aggressive, and was the most satisfying moment available in a game of croquet. Croquet required a reasonably flat lawn and sufficient space for the wicket course. The 1950s suburban lawn frequently met both requirements. The game is still played as a slightly eccentric and old-fashioned hobby. In the 1950s, it was simply a Sunday afternoon in the backyard. Croquet was outside. The next item was inside but felt like it belonged outside. Number 92. The aquarium. A glass tank on a metal stand in the living room. Goldfish, or in more ambitious households, tropical fish, neon tetras, guppies, a single angelfish, an algae eater on the glass. The tank had a light on top and a bubbling filter that kept the water oxygenated and produced a constant soft sound. The fish required feeding every day and a water change every 2 weeks, and the occasional diagnosis of white spot disease, which was treated with a product from the pet store. The aquarium was the first living thing most suburban children were responsible for keeping alive. The stakes were low enough to be instructive and high enough to matter. The aquarium was quiet. The next thing was loud. Number 93. The cap gun war. Not one child with a cap gun. A dozen children, some with 6 shooters, some with rifles, some with both, running through a neighborhood in a continuous reenactment of every Western ever shown on television. Cowboys and Indians, which was the standard description for a game that involved 2 groups with different weapons pursuing and ambushing each other across every available terrain. Fences were climbed. Hedges were used for cover. The rules of engagement were entirely self-generated and entirely understood. The smell of sulfur from the caps hung over the neighborhood on summer afternoons. No adult organized this. No adult needed to. The cap gun war ended when someone had to go home for dinner. The next thing happened at dinner. Number 94. Grace before meals. Every family, every meal. Someone said the words, or the family said them together. The words varied by denomination and by household. God is great, God is good, let us thank Him for our food. Bless us, O Lord, in these Thy gifts. Come, Lord Jesus, be our guest. The youngest child who could speak was often given the responsibility of saying grace, which was considered an honor and which was the first public speaking most American children ever did. Grace ended with Amen, spoken simultaneously by everyone at the table. The meal began. The habit of acknowledging that food required thanks and that thanks required pausing before eating is less universal now. The pause itself is less universal now. Grace ended the silence. The next item ended the evening. Number 95. Reading aloud. After dinner, before television had fully taken over, parents read to their children. Not picture books, though those too. Chapter books. A chapter a night, read aloud at the kitchen table or in the living room or at the bedside. The Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, Tom Swift, Little Women, the Bobbsey Twins. The reading aloud session had its own rhythm. A chapter was a specific unit of story, and a chapter was the limit. The child who asked for one more chapter was almost always told no and almost always asked again. The parent who gave in and read a second chapter was remembered specifically. Reading aloud required a parent to sit still in the same room as their child for 20 minutes with no other purpose. This was not considered remarkable. It was simply reading before bed. Reading ended the day. The next memory begins it. Number 96. The new electric refrigerator. By 1955, over 90% of American homes had one. But for millions of families who had grown up with ice boxes, the electric refrigerator was still new enough to be remarkable. The motor that clicked on and off in the kitchen, the light that came on automatically when you opened the door, the freezer compartment at the top, small and perpetually frosted over, where your mother kept a metal ice cube tray with a lever that cracked the cubes loose. The ice cube tray was operated with a specific pulling motion that required more force than you expected the first time and less force than you applied, which meant the tray often lurched and cubes scattered across the kitchen floor. The refrigerator hummed continuously. You did not notice the hum until the power went out and the hum stopped, and the kitchen felt wrong in a way that took a moment to identify. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. The next figure knocked on the front door once a year and was remembered forever. A man in a suit, carrying a sample volume, knocked on your front door on an evening when the whole family was home. He was the encyclopedia salesman. He had an appointment your parents had agreed to. He spread the sample volume on the kitchen table and opened it. The photographs, the maps, the complete knowledge of the world, organized alphabetically, available in your own home at any time. The encyclopedia represented education and aspiration, and the future that was available to children whose parents provided the right tools. The full set cost between $200 and $400, which was a significant sum. Many families bought it anyway. The encyclopedia sat in a special bookcase in the living room. Children consulted it for school reports. The salesman had been right. It was useful. It was eventually replaced by something that cost nothing and contained everything. The encyclopedia is in the attic now. The encyclopedia held knowledge. The next memory held something more personal. Number 98. The Family Photograph Album. A large cloth-covered book with thick black pages and photographs held in place by small black adhesive corners. The photographs were black and white. They were printed at the drugstore from film you dropped off in a paper envelope and retrieved a week later. The album was kept on the bookshelf in the living room. You looked through it when someone brought it out, usually when relatives visited. The photographs showed your parents before you existed, which was a strange thing to comprehend. People standing in front of things. People at occasions. The photographs were the only visual record of the past that existed and were treated with the respect that unique things receive. The digital photograph has made the photograph infinitely reproducible and infinitely disposable. The photograph in the black album with the adhesive corners was neither. The photograph album preserved the past. The next item was about the future. Number 99. The piggy bank. A ceramic pig with a slot on the back for coins. You dropped coins in and listened to them clink against each other as the bank filled. The sound changed as more coins were added. A nearly empty bank produced a single clear clink. A nearly full bank produced a muffled thud. The way to retrieve money before the bank was full was to turn it upside down and shake a coin out through the slot, which worked for pennies but not for larger coins. The piggy bank had no combination, no key, no security of any kind. The security was the fragility of the ceramic, the fact that smashing it meant ending it. Most children found this a sufficient deterrent. Most parents replaced the bank after it was smashed with an identical one, purchased at the 5 and dime, in the understanding that this too would be smashed eventually, and that was how saving worked. The piggy bank held savings. The last memory held the entire childhood. Number 100. The last day of summer. Not the first day of school. The last day of summer. The Sunday before Labor Day, or whatever the final unclaimed day was before the school year started. The morning was the same as every other summer morning. You woke up when you woke up. The light came through the window at the summer angle. The birds were the same birds. The street outside was the same street. But you knew that the 10 weeks that had belonged entirely to you were ending tonight. That tomorrow the alarm would set the schedule again, and the schedule would hold until June. The last day of summer had a quality to it that every subsequent day of adult life has attempted to locate and has never quite found again. You did not know, on that Sunday in September 1956, that you were living through something that would end. You just knew the summer was ending. You went outside anyway. You stayed out until the streetlights came on. 100 memories, 100 ordinary facts of childhood in 1950s America. None of them marked as important while they were happening. All of them permanent now. You were there, and you are still there. Every time you close your eyes and let yourself go back. Leave a comment starting with the word pennies. Tell us which one brought you back. Other people will not know why you started with that word, but we will. Thanks for taking this trip down memory lane with us. We will see you in the next one.